Jimmy Butler, he's a very interesting player to me.
Just goes to show the offense for the Dallas Stars could not keep up, and when the defense needed to step up, the Lightning's offense just overpowered them.
It makes it almost impossible for their bats to get going or have any confidence in the locker room when you're getting absolutely hosed on the defensive end.
He's like, oh shoot, I don't know where to go with the ball because I haven't been able to think.
It's their defense, man. Mika Fitzpatrick, T.J. Watt.
You saw Luka. I'm very intrigued to see how Luka bounces back after his first playoff series.
For next season, there are massive free agents like Giannis. And if Giannis goes to a team like the Heat, like I said before, I expect them to win the championship. 4 teams who could win the AFC in my mind, legitimately. Steelers, Chiefs, Titans, Ravens.
Stay undefeated when they face the mighty Cowboys with Garrett Gilbert and Tony Pollard.
It was a great series. Game 4 was one of the best games I've ever watched in my entire life.
So happy when the Astros lost because it would definitely be a 2020 thing to have the Astros win a World Series, and then you have to hear them.
Now LeBron's a 4-time champion, and Anthony Davis gets his first.
It's unacceptable.
Yeah, I was impressed by their game. Braden Point, Andre Palat, Nikita Kucherov, that was the best line in the playoffs, no doubt.
I think you have 2 established number 1 wide receivers in Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup, and I think you have an emerging star in CeeDee Lamb. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the 23rd episode of Outsiders Opinions. We have recorded over 20 videos, so let us know what your favorite video has been so far in the comments. Also, if this is your first time hearing our voices, please make sure to listen to our trailer, as it gives an explanation about the goal of our podcast. Make sure to double check with our last pair of episodes as we discuss NBA free agency, and also look at our playoff predictions for the NBA, as they may turn out to be 100% or they might not be good at all. But today we'll be doing our power rankings, and we have a shakeup at 32, Austin. Do you want to reveal it?
Yeah, sure. At 32 for the first time this season, not being the Jets. Congratulations to them and their fans. Or maybe not. Maybe they wanted Trevor Lawrence. But at 32, we have the Jacksonville Jaguars. They have played terribly these last many weeks, and I feel like the Jets have outperformed them as of late. How do you feel?
Yeah, ever since that win over the Colts, they have not won a game since. And there's not much else. Maybe they'll get better with Trevor Lawrence if they decide to take him. But I think we can move on to number 31, where the Jets didn't go too far up, but they went up 1 spot. And that win over the Rams was pretty shocking. I was in disbelief. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, the Jets definitely surprised me, but as I saw with the interview with Frank Gore earlier, he did not want to go out. If he does retire, he didn't want to go out 0-16, and I commend him for scoring that touchdown and helping put the Jets on a winning ride home for the first time ever this season. And I never like to see a team go 0-16, as it's heartbreaking to never win a game during a season. And even if the Jets did want Trevor Lawrence, I feel like you're not really a true fan of your team if you want them to go 0-16.
Yeah, and Sam Darnold may have saved his job if that was a route they wanted to take, was taking Trevor Lawrence. But they made some key plays, and they got a good lead. And they almost gave it up. But I think we can move on to number 30, where we have the Texans, and they almost beat the Colts, but they still lost. I really am interested in what they do for the GM, and the GM's going to have a tough job because there aren't picks. Like, when you're the Jets and Jaguars, if you're in a normal situation, you're happy, oh, at least I get a high pick. But with the Texans, that pick is going to the Dolphins, who are celebrating.
Yeah, I mean, the Texans have a tough rebuild after last season, where they almost made the conference championship, being up by so much against the Chiefs, to now being in a situation where they don't really have a place to turn to. They have Deshaun Watson, but I mean, after losing everything they lost, and for almost nothing, they're looking as they're just in neutral right now, not looking in any direction for the future. And I think we should move on to 29, where a team who really does, I think, have a bright future coming in soon, and in the Bengals. That was a surprising win. What do you think about that?
Oh my gosh, yeah. And the quarterback keepers, like when he Finley, that was the quarterback, right? It was the first
Jeff Finley, yes.
that 23-yard touchdown run. Like the Steeler outside linebackers just weren't expecting it, which makes it a great keeper. And I think that was the game-winning touchdown. Well, they did kick that field goal, but they could have had more interceptions if the defensive backs held on, because Roethlisberger was just giving it away.
Yeah, I mean the Bengals, they deserve to be higher than they were last time. I believe that they were at 30 last time, and now we have them at 29. They beat one of the supposed to be best teams in the league. When you're 11-3 now, you're supposed to be really good. But I mean, we'll show you guys where they are coming up shortly. And I think we can move on to 28 against a team who really did put up a fight against another good team in the Falcons.
Well, yeah, but as they stayed true to their history, they gave up a lead to Tom Brady, a double-digit lead.
Yeah, that was the first 17-point comeback by Tom Brady since the Super Bowl against the Falcons. So they did stay true. That was the biggest halftime lead that Tom Brady's come back against since he was down by a ton against the Falcons before. And they have pieces that can help them build in the short term, but long term, I mean, it's going to be difficult as Matt Ryan and Julio Jones continue to age, and their defense isn't looking any better than it has been these past couple of years. And yeah, they're another team that I think stuck in neutral. Yeah, do you want to move on to 27?
A team that I wasn't surprised with Matt Patricia being fired, because that's happened in between our last power rankings. I think that's the right move, and I'm interested they'll trade Matthew Stafford just because he's getting older, and I think you could get some picks for him. I definitely think there are going to be some teams looking to upgrade at quarterback, and Matthew Stafford's a really good quarterback. It's just he plays for a bad team that can't support his play.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, one team that I think is interesting for Matthew Stafford to go to is a team like Washington. Alex Smith has continued to get injured. We saw the antics that Dwayne Haskins done recently going to the club after their loss against Seattle. And I feel like he'd be a really good fit for a team like that who has good wide receivers and tight ends and running backs, and their O-line's getting better, but needs that quarterback that's at least above average. And Matthew Stafford is definitely that. He was very injured coming into this last game, and he did really fight against the Titans. And I praise him for what he's done for this organization, but I feel like he and the Lions need to move on to greener pastures, whether for the better or for the worse. I think we can move on to 26, which is this is far from where they were last year. You want to tell?
Yeah, it's the 49ers. And talking about the Lions and trading Matthew Stafford, I think the 49ers could be interested in Matthew Stafford. I think you can definitely stick with Jimmy Garoppolo, but their front office, I really like how they structure their contracts, as their contracts are front loaded. So near the end of their deal, they can cut them, and there's not much dead cap. Like if they wanted to cut Jimmy Garoppolo, their dead cap would only be $2 million, and if they kept Jimmy Garoppolo, they'd be paying him around $23 million. So I think that financial flexibility could make them take, I think, a better quarterback in Matthew Stafford and just cutting Jimmy Garoppolo without taking that financial destruction like we see with the Eagles right now. We'll get to the Eagles later. But yeah, the 49ers just really injured, but I think they can definitely repeat what they did the year before they made that Super Bowl run. What about you?
Yeah, I feel like they could take a quality defensive player with their pick. I think they should stick with Jimmy, but it's also interesting to see what Matthew Stafford would add to a team like that. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be hard for San Francisco fans to grasp what this season has done. 2020 has not been a kind year to them.
Yeah.
But Yeah, there isn't much more to say. They lost to the Cowboys, and that's about as worse as you can get right now. And at 25, speaking of the devil, we have the Cowboys. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Um, I did come on and say the Cowboys aren't good at drafting defensive talent, which they aren't because they passed up on TJ Watt, but they're good at drafting offensive talent. Like you have CD Lamb in the first round, but you also have Tony Pollard, which I was excited to see him play as. Before the Zeke extension, I wanted to see Tony Pollard as the starting back, and he played really well on Sunday. That touchdown run was incredible. They also have people, they're like third string linemen. They also have second string Connor McGovern at right guard filling in for the great Zach Martin. There's also Connor Williams. So I think they're great at drafting offensive talent. So good job to the front office, but I wish they could do that on the defensive side. But we did see some key plays. They have been getting takeaways, which is a good thing for the defense.
Yeah, and I
With
think
these,
their defense played much better than the score showed. I mean, 49ers threw a touchdown pass at a Hail Mary at the end of the game, which didn't really help the scoreboard. But yeah, they're not as good as Cowboy fans would want, and they do need to help on both sides of the ball. I feel like because of how many injuries are happening on the offensive line, they could afford to draft another O lineman to help with that scenario. And like you said, they need more defensive talent. They need to hire somebody that knows how to draft defensive talent so that they can put their money where their mouth is and bring a championship to a Dallas franchise that hasn't had one in a while.
they should also have a linebacker who knows when the game has changed. My friend sent me a tweet of Jalen Smith not realizing that the Cowboys game had been flexed out this week. So that's the starting middle linebacker for the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, and we can move on to 24 with a team that's had a very, very interesting season. The Denver Broncos. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it will be very interesting to see what the Broncos do. As I think Drew Lock should get another year, but John Elway is not very. He's not very patient with young quarterbacks. He likes to just get someone in, and it will be interesting to see. But they've also been hit by injuries. Von Miller, great defense player, has been out, and offensive wise, they lost their number one wide receiver in Cortland Sutton. But that allows another bright wide receiver, Jerry Judy, to get some more playing time. Do you agree?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I agree. Drew Lock should get another season under the helm, especially with it's 2020. It's been a crazy year. He hasn't got the preparation that's necessary, especially for a young quarterback. But I mean, John Elway isn't the most patient person, like you said, and he may look in a different direction as soon as next year. Yeah, I mean, it could be another team where Matthew Stafford may turn up and they may trade Drew Lock to the Lions to see if he can grow there, as the Broncos defense is playing really, really well and is getting older and needs the offense to come through for them. And we can move on to 23, I feel like, with the team that they played in the Super Bowl not too long ago in the Panthers. Your thoughts?
Yeah, the Panthers and Broncos have both fallen, but the Panthers they almost caused an upset late in Lambeau, but I think they just need a time, and it would be interesting to see because I think as of right now they're at the number 4 overall pick, so maybe they want to make a trade with the Jaguars or Jets and maybe nab Justin Fields or Trevor Lawrence, and I think or Panay Sewell. But I think Matt Rule is a good coach. They did fire their GM, which I think when you have your coach that you like, but you bring in a GM, I'm not a huge fan of that because I want the GM and the coach to know if one falters, the other one's getting fired. So I want that partnership
Yeah,
together.
yeah. It's an interesting dilemma because I Matt Rule has played, well, not played, but has done, I thought, a really good job, especially with the loss of Christian McCaffrey for a large majority of the season. And this is his first year coaching, and I feel like he's brought in a new mindset to the locker room that Ron Rivera didn't have because Matt Rule is more of an offensive head coach, and Ron Rivera's done an amazing job with Washington this year. But it's another breakup, just like we saw with, I feel like, going to a basketball terminology, like with Doc Rivers and the Clippers. Doc Rivers is a great coach. Ron Rivera is a great coach, but their teams needed to move on in a different direction, and they got a coaching job immediately just because of how good they are. And I feel like that's really the scenario that the Panthers were in. And it's going to be interesting to see where they move on because, like you said, a new GM being brought in with an old coach just feels like an awkward scenario because the GM has to have some sort of, like you said, partnership with the coach that's in power right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think um, for this team, their GM and the coach is the same person. And at 22, we have the Patriots, and of course, that GM and coach is Bill Belichick. It's crazy to see how good Cam Newton or how well he was playing at the beginning, and just how things have changed for him. What do you think?
Yeah. I feel like it just took a couple of weeks for teams to realize how he played. Um, but I don't feel like his time with the Patriots is completely done. I feel like they could run it back next season and see if they could improve anything around him. They need to draft a wide receiver that's not named Julian Edelman. Uh, but I mean, their team, their defense, they lost a lot of players before the season, and they will get them back next season. I feel like they'll be a much better team because of it. I'll be interested to see what their decision is with the QB situation. They could draft one this year in the first round, late first round, or mid the first round, or they could decide that they just want to pick someone in free agency. Another interesting team for Matt Stafford. Maybe they trade a couple defensive pieces to the Lions or draft compensation to the Lions for Matt Stafford, which would be really interesting. But I mean, we'll have to see.
Just to say about the quarterback, I think another interesting one is if the 49ers do make a trade for Matt Stafford and they cut Jimmy Garoppolo, I think the prodigal son returns to the New England Patriots or Andy Dalton. I think Andy Dalton is a good quarterback. It's just he can't save the Cowboys defense. And I think he doesn't turn over the ball. And I think that's what Bill Belichick wants. He wants a guy who won't turn over the ball and can let his defense do the play. But I think we can move on to 21 with the Chargers and Justin Herbert. Like, I did not expect him to be playing this well right now.
Yeah, I would agree. He's definitely my pick for Offensive Rookie of the Year. He's played tremendous and led the offense to a top 10 offense in the league, which is especially inspiring performance for what they were last year. I feel like they're another team moving in the right direction. They just need Anthony Lynn has been okay as a coach. I feel like he still needs another year to prove himself. But if they continue to tank in the standings, I feel like they should move on to maybe a Jim Caldwell or someone else that is proving themselves that can make the playoffs. Um, but yeah, I don't really have much to say. Justin Fields is a really, really good quarterback, and I feel like they made the right choice in drafting him.
Yeah, and I think we can move to the next team. At 20, we have the Minnesota Vikings. And I'm not sure what to think of this team. What do you think?
Yeah, they're an interesting team. Some weeks they look like they're a top 5 team in the NFC, and other teams they look like they're a bottom 5. I can't really make it out, but I mean, it's going to be tough. They're a team that's lost a lot of defensive talent lately, and while they still have to win out to go 8-8 and potentially have a chance if the Cardinals lose their last 2 games and the Bears go at least 1-1, but I don't see them making the playoffs. And Justin Jefferson, that one play, I don't know if you saw where he was screaming at Kirk Cousins for making a bad throw. I mean, I thought that was funny, but yeah, the Vikings are another team running it neutral. They have to get it out soon. They can't keep going on to these terrible starts at the beginning of the season, expecting to make it into the playoffs, especially in a good position for them to win. Anything you got to add?
No, not really. But I think that trading Stephon Diggs to the Bills, we'll get to them later. I think it was a good trade for them because Justin Jefferson was the guy they nabbed with that first round pick, and that's something you don't really see these days. A team that does well in in both the trade
Yeah,
on
yeah,
both
yeah.
sides.
That was, I think, perfect for both sides. Both got the wide receiver they wanted, and Justin Jefferson and Stephon Diggs are both Pro Bowlers now. I mean, I feel like that worked out perfectly for both teams, and it was monetarily even better for the Vikings.
Yeah, and I think we can move to number 19 where speaking of the quarterback contract destruction, that's a problem they're in right now. As we're talking about the Eagles, um, I think Jalen Hurts, you keep riding with him, and you got to find a way to get rid of Wentz. What do you think?
Yeah, you could say that their contract situation hurts a lot, but I mean, it's interesting for me to see because I didn't expect Jalen Hurts to perform this well, and he almost led them to a victory. Should have led them to a victory against the Cardinals, but he's growing, he's learning more, and I feel like he's more of a quarterback that fits the Doug Peterson system better than Wentz because I feel like I don't know what happened with Wentz from his 2017 days. I don't feel like he's as mobile as he was back then, and I feel like that's what Nick Foles did better. While Nick Foles is not fast at all, he's more like a Tom Brady type where he can move in the pocket a lot better than I guess Wentz can. And Wentz, he's so inaccurate right now that I don't know what team would want him. But if they could trade him on the market, as some teams are interested, uh, I feel like it's better to stay with Jalen Hurts as he can really do a lot for his team and grow with the young receivers that they have on their offense.
Yeah, and to give the numbers for how bad this cap is, I'm looking at 2021. So the 2021 dead cap, if they cut him before June 1st, would be 59 million, and then the 2021 they would save a cap, they would save money of negative 24 million. Then if they want to cut him post June 1st, the dead cap would be 49 million, and then they save about negative 15 million. And then trade route pre June 1st, the dead cap would be 33 million, and then the cap savings would be a mere $852,000. And then if they wanted to trade him after June 1st, would be the dead cap would be 9 million, and then the cap savings would be 25 million. And speaking of trades, I think a team, you were talking about 2017 with Carson Wentz. That was the last time Frank Reich was his offensive coordinator, who's now the head coach of the Colts, who I'm not sure what they think. They do have Philip Rivers now, but I'm not sure in the next 5 years if he will still be there. So I think that's a trade or a place that Carson Wentz may want to go to, as that kind of reminds me of Nick Foles going to Andy Reid, the guy that worked with him and kind of kept him in football, and then he made that incredible run with the Eagles.
Yeah. Um, I agree. They could move on to uh, Indianapolis with Carson, but right now I wouldn't be making that decision because he's really outperformed him this year. Philip has over Carson Wentz, but like you said, Frank Reich may bring something new out of him that we haven't seen since 2017. That'd be interesting to see. I feel like we've talked too much about the Eagles, so we can move on to 18. Do you want to say?
Yeah, it's we're not moving that far. It's the New York Giants who, um, I'm not. They, I think Joe Judge is the right coach for him. He seems to be playing well right now. He has some tricks. I'm not sure about the. He made a lot of daring plays on fourth and one, near the end zone when he could have kicked the field goal. I think he should have kicked the field goal against the Browns. What do you think?
I disagree because of how good the Browns are this season, at least record wise. You want to get some sort of momentum. And I really like Joe Judge's coaching style. I feel like he is the right person for the Giants. And the difference is for the reason why they're 5-9, in my opinion, is Saquon. If Saquon was healthy and Daniel Jones or really Colt McCoy hasn't played bad in the 2 games he started for him, he hasn't made it to where they're going to lose because he starts. I feel like he's played just as well as Daniel Jones because he doesn't turn the ball over that much. He didn't turn the ball over against the Browns. And Joe Judge, like I said, it's really surprised me with how well he's coached his team. But I mean, the Giants are in another situation where they just need their running back to get healthy, like the Panthers, where Christian McCaffrey's been out for most of the season. And the Giants need to continue drafting defensive talent, especially in outside linebacker positions. Tay Crowder, who was Mr. Irrelevant last season, last pick in the draft, I feel like he needs to either improve or they need to improve the position moving on from him. But their defense is getting better and their offense is getting better, and they just have a lot of young players on their roster that don't know how to win yet.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think we can move on to number 17. We got the Las Vegas Raiders, who Marcus Mariota coming back. I'm not sure if because I think John Gruden's not a huge fan of Derek Carr, and I think he was a huge fan of Marcus Mariota coming out of college when John Gruden was still in the analyst still working for ESPN and not coaching. So I kind of see, depending on Marcus Mariota playing, he might become the starting quarterback. What do you think?
I have an insight into the Raiders situation, and from what I've heard, John Gruden isn't the biggest fan of Derek Carr. He was just waiting for a moment for him to be moved out of that starting position because John Gruden's been known for liking quarterbacks who could move outside the pocket, and I feel like Marcus Mariota may be the situation of starting for the rest of the season, and so they can test out what will happen next season at the quarterback position. It'll be interesting to see another team that could be interesting for Matthew Stafford to go to, as he can move outside the pocket, not as well as he used to, but better than Derek Carr has been lately. Uh, yeah,
Yeah, and maybe you could trade Derek Carr. But speaking of the quarterbacks, number 16, we got the Bears, and Mitch had 3 touchdowns, I believe, this past Sunday. What do you think of the Bears right now, Austin?
yeah. I mean, it's an interesting situation. Their defense is outstanding, keeping them in the playoff hunt. If the Cardinals end up losing one of these last 2 games, and if the Seahawks were to lose to the Rams this weekend, and the Packers were to win this week, they would clinch the 1 seed because there wouldn't be a 3-way tie between the Saints, Seahawks, and Packers, which would put the Packers at the bottom of that, and that means that the Bears, who could beat the Packers if they sit everybody, would get into the playoffs, which would be crazy for a team that is not all that great on the offensive side of the ball. Your thoughts?
Yeah, their defense is incredible, but it's just the offense needs to do something where they aren't constantly putting that defense back on the field with constantly doing 3 and outs for the Bears. So it will be interesting to see if Mitch keeps playing well. And I think just the key thing is run the ball, but that's hard because of their offensive line. So if they can find a way to run the ball, and you just take up time possession and let your defense do the rest of the work. But I think we can move on to a team that has fallen from grace, as Austin talked about them a little bit earlier in the episode. But the Pittsburgh Steelers, they since starting 11-0, they have lost the last 3 of their games, and to the Washington Football Team, Bills, and last night the Bengals. They just either win all of them or they lose all of them. What do you think, Austin?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough situation. It's tough for me seeing a team that we had really, really high earlier in the season in our power rankings at 15. But I mean, they're off. They cannot run the ball. Ben Roethlisberger did not play well last night, even though I feel like he's been better this season than I expected. Uh, their defense has fallen from grace, like you said, and while they still have a top 7 defense, they may be on the brink of going even further down if they're going to allow that many points to the Bengals. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and the next 2 games are pretty rough for them. You're playing the Colts, and if you can't really get going against the Bengals defense, and you're facing the Colts next week, who have a much better defense than the Bengals and most of the rest of the league, and then you play the Browns. I'm not sure if this is what you want heading into what could be five, losing 5 games in a row into the playoffs. This is the time you're not supposed to be heating up, not cooling down. And I think they just need to make a dedication to the run game because I think their defense will get better. But the run game, it takes a lot of pressure off Big Ben, who's getting older in age. And I'm not sure if they can be slinging it with him. I think I heard they were doing 2 passes per run attempt, per 1 run attempt. And I think you should flip that. You need to be running the ball, especially with an older quarterback.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I mean, the running game is so bad right now that I don't know if you can afford to lose that many yards. I mean, it's tough. They need to figure out if it's their O line is the issue or their running backs. James Conner was injured last night, and I feel like he is the best of their trio of running backs with McFarland and Benny Snell. But they need to figure out what the problem is and address it immediately and try out anything new these next 2 weeks, as they're facing really tough opponents who are both going to make the playoffs in the Colts and the Cleveland Browns. Uh, I feel like we can move on to number 14, a team that beat them a couple of weeks ago, in the Washington Football Team. Your thoughts?
Yeah, you were talking about Dwayne Haskins hitting the club after a loss. I think, and he did throw 2 interceptions against the Seahawks. I think if you just have a quarterback who does not turn over the ball and just knows smart football, they would have beaten the Seahawks because that defensive line, they've drafted and they've used one of their first round picks on a defensive lineman, starting with Jonathan Allen and then ending right now with Chase Young. We'll see what they do in the next draft. But that defensive line is just incredible. And I really think if they can solidify their line, they don't really need an all-star quarterback. You mentioned Matt Stafford. I think if they just build an O line, they can definitely win the division because they have the running backs to run the ball. Do you agree?
Yeah, they have the receiving back in J.D. McKissick. They have the running back with Antonio Gibson. They have the change of pace back with Peyton Barber. Their offense is pretty well sorted out with their positions that aren't like the O line or QB. And I agree. If Alex Smith were to play this past weekend, I think they would have beat the Seahawks. But they didn't win, and they have been pushed down the ranking accordingly. And I feel like we can move on to number 13.
Yeah, 13. We have the Cleveland Browns, who they're doing what they're a good football team's supposed to do. They're supposed to beat teams that aren't really that good, and it's shocking. And they might have a chance to win the AFC North depending on what Pittsburgh does. But I think Kevin Stefanski was the right choice. That's weird to say. Cleveland Browns hitting on the head coach, and then they hit on their quarterback. Baker Mayfield's playing really well right now. What do you think?
Yeah, Baker is playing exceptionally. They need to beat another team that's above 500. They have beaten one right now, and that's actually two. They beat the Colts on October 11th, and then they beat the Titans on December 6th. They need to prove week 17 that they can do it again. If they could do it again, they would probably be much higher in the list. But because 90% of their wins have come against teams that are below 500, it makes it hard for us to put them up too high because I don't want to over analyze against a team that's terrible. But Baker Mayfield's definitely played better this season. Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, one of the best running back duos in the league, and their O line is exceptional.
Yeah, I think we can move on to number 12, and that we have the Cardinals, and their offense is great, but I'm not sure about their defense. But if they can sneak in, it would be interesting to see, especially with Kyler Murray as he adds in a different dynamic. What do you think?
Yeah, week 17 is the week where they lose. They make the playoffs or they don't. Um, they have to go out there and get it. They have to beat the Rams, especially if like I said, happens if if the Rams beat the Seahawks this week, and then the Packers beat the Titans, the Packers would clinch the 1 seed. Because the Packers would, if they lose the next week, would be tied with the Saints, and they wouldn't have to worry about the 3-way tie with the Seattle team, the Seahawks, and so the Cardinals would have to go out there and get it when the Chicago may go against the Packers team. It doesn't have anybody who's actually playing that's good, so that they can rest, especially in a 2020 season where they may need it. But the Cardinals, it's interesting. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins can either go off or sometimes he doesn't. And like you said, their defense isn't playing good enough right now. They could go 9-7, which isn't the best record for making the playoffs, and they would probably play the Saints in the first round, which would be really interesting as it's a young quarterback going against an old quarterback. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and it would definitely be interesting for sure, as the Saints haven't really fared well in the past few rounds of the playoffs, past few years. But I definitely think it'd be an interesting matchup. And speaking of their head coach, Cliff Kingsbury, I think this is his second year, and it's definitely been interesting because he was fired from his college head coaching job, and he wound up becoming a head coach for an NFL team. A very special route to becoming a head coach, and it seems to be paying off. Would you agree? Or
Yeah, I would agree. Cliff Kingsbury, after getting fired from Texas Tech, was given a chance by the Cardinals, and I mean, he's really come through. Uh, I think it's interesting to see how his journey has brought him here. But if they win these last 2 weeks, or if the Packers end up losing to the Titans this week, and they just have to win one of their next 2 games, it'll be awesome to see Kyler and him in that fun offense make it to the playoffs.
Yeah, I think we can move on to number 11, where we have the Baltimore Ravens, and they're starting to play well. Lamar Jackson is starting to run the ball. He's being what we saw sort of last year, but that passing offense is just not there. I really think in the offseason they should look for a number one wide receiver. As look at what it did for the Bills. Bills were not that good, or well, they were good, but they didn't have a true number one wide receiver. They had Cole Beasley, but that number one wide receiver now is Stephon Diggs, and that has just elevated them. And I think that's what could happen to the Ravens if they got a number one wide receiver, as then you have that number one wide receiver with Marquise Brown, who I think is a good wide receiver. Your thoughts?
Yeah, their offense isn't what it should be. I feel like it should be better. And they're another team that hasn't beat that many teams that are above 500. The only teams they've beaten are the Browns twice and then the Colts once. They need to prove uh, that they can do it, and they won't get to show that until the playoffs. They have a really easy schedule as they play the Giants and the Bengals. I mean, the Bengals just beat the Steelers, so what am I even saying, I guess? But it'll be interesting to see how they do in the playoffs when most teams want to go out against hard opponents and win those games so that you get some confidence going in. But the Ravens are going to be playing some questionable opponents, to say the least, going into the last couple games, and their offense will need to show that it's improving against these poor teams before they head in and play a team like the Bills or the Chiefs in the first round. And depending on how those teams do, and it'll be interesting to see how the Ravens would perform against a defense like one of those.
Yeah, definitely an interesting team if they can make it into the playoffs. But I think we can enter into the top 10. And number 10, we have the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah.
And
Your thoughts?
yeah, Brian Flores has been. I'm very skeptical of coaches coming from Bill Belichick just because a lot of them haven't panned out. But him, and Joe Judge seem to be panning out, and it's interesting to see how Tua is playing. What do you think?
Yeah, it is. It really is. Tua, he hasn't been playing amazing, but he hasn't been playing bad. He's a young quarterback that I feel like still has to learn some things before he becomes elite. Uh, but it's really their defense. Xavier Howard is one of the best defensive players in the league right now, and he's really showing it. Especially with their addition of Byron Jones from the Cowboys after the Cowboys decided to let him go. I mean, it's just their defense keeps them playing better and better and better, and they're going to get healthier and healthier and healthier as these next weeks go by. But the Dolphins are going to have some tough opponents coming up, as I believe that they play the Bills in Week 17, and that's really the week where they're going to have to really show whether or not they really want to make the playoffs this year. They should beat the Raiders this week. I feel like they're much better than the Raiders, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But against the Bills, I mean, it depends if the Bills are actually going to be trying to keep that 2 seed or what happens. And the Dolphins, that may be either ticket in or their ticket out, because the Ravens don't play that hard of an opponents, and the Ravens will most likely win these next 2 weeks, which means the Dolphins have to also.
Yeah, and I think the Raiders are still in the playoff hunt. So Dolphins versus Raiders definitely has playoff implications. And you were talking about their defense. This is a defense that has did it 3 times. Besides the Raiders, they intercepted Patrick Mahomes 3 times, and Xavier Howard had an incredible interception. And so that's definitely an interesting thing, especially if they go far in the playoffs and may face Mahomes again. But I think we can move on to number 9, where we have the Bucks, and they're definitely an interesting team as they have a lot of veteran players, but they just don't seem to be clicking. What do you think?
Yeah, it's difficult to see a team that I really thought was going to be a serious contender not really show what it really means to beat up against bad teams like the Browns and Ravens have been doing this whole season. They almost lost to a depleted Falcons team, and they really needed some heroics from Antonio Brown, of all people, to get the lead at the end of the game. I mean, they haven't been moving up. We had them at 9 last power rankings, and we have them at 9 again. It's because we don't really know what this team is. They have to really show us whether or not they are legit contenders or if they're pretenders, and it's going to be interesting to see how they show that throughout their last couple games of the season, as there's a very, very, very high chance they make the playoffs. I don't know if they've clinched yet. I don't think they have, because if they lose out, they would be they would have 9 wins, and I don't know how the tiebreaker works with Chicago, but um, it'll be interesting to see once I believe they make the playoffs because they play the Lions next week, how they do against some of these teams like the Seahawks or the Rams or somebody else, some of these teams that they may have played or have not played, and see how Tom Brady really orchestrates his offense with Bruce Arians as head coach.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And I think we can move on to number 8, where we have the Seahawks. And I'm not really sure if this defense can play well when they play a lot of good offenses. What do you think?
Yeah, their defense needed some bad plays from Dwayne Haskins for them to come away with a win. And against, I don't know if their offense is capable of coming through against great defenses like Washington showed last week. If you hold a team to 20 points, your offense should get 21. And it was some bad plays by the offense of Washington that really cost them that game. And I'm really worried about the Seahawks. I really thought that they were contenders before the season, but I don't really know how they really fit into the scheme of things, as they may not be even a top 4 team in the NFC come playoff time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And speaking of defensive lines, I think as we transition to number 7, we have the Rams, and Rams play the Rams do play the Seahawks, as you mentioned, and their defensive line is just incredible. And then on the other side of the ball is the offensive line, and they both, I think, controlling the line of scrimmage is a huge thing, especially if the Packers clinch the number 1. You're not going to be wanting to throw the ball on Lambeau Field if they do make it that far. And I think they have the potential to run really well. What do you think?
Yeah, they do have 3 running backs who can all run the ball effectively. I feel like that game against the Jets was a fluke, especially because Sean McVay is a very good head coach, and they will come through from that game knowing what they need to fix. Um, but they have to prove that that was a fluke by playing this week against the Seahawks and showing everyone that they're better than what they showed last week. Um, but yeah, the Rams, Jared Goff also has to prove to all his haters that he's better than what he showed last week also. And we can move on to number 6 where we have the Tennessee Titans. Your thoughts?
Yeah, the Titans are, it's Derrick Henry time. And I think they're definitely a dangerous team as you have Derrick Henry, but also this is a full year of Ryan Tannehill as the starting quarterback. I think this is around the same time Ryan Tannehill started really helping the Titans, and I think his ability as a passer really makes this offense really good as you can run, and they also have good wide receivers, AJ Brown and I think Corey Davis, but I'm not sure about their defense. I think if their defense is playing well, they gave up a lot of points to the Lions. While that is Matthew Stafford, but you really need to start getting your defense because defense and a strong running game, which they have in Derrick Henry, would be deadly in the playoffs, similar to what they did last year. What do you think?
Yeah, and Derrick Henry is going to have to carry a large load for this team. But like you mentioned, Ryan Tannehill's really shown that he is a franchise QB. He can be a quality quarterback for any team in the league, really. And I feel like that was more of Adam Gase with the Dolphins than that was Ryan Tannehill with the Dolphins. And I feel like the Jets have also proved that too. Um, but there's a reason why we have this team at number 5 next, above them, and that's because of the defense, like you mentioned. I don't feel like the Titans' defense do really come to show, and I feel like we can move on to number 5 now, which is the Indianapolis Colts. Your thoughts?
Yeah, Indianapolis. They're starting to get a run game, but you talked about their defense, and especially with the team that they have to dethrone, the Chiefs, and even I would rank this team better. The Bills will get to them later. You're gonna need to stop those offenses, and I think you can do that with their defense. But then on offense, I think you have to do that run game, and it would definitely be interesting to see how Philip Rivers does because if he doesn't turn over the ball, I think they can go deep in the playoffs.
Yeah, I would agree. If they don't turn over the ball, which Philip Rivers, I don't think he's throwing a pick in his last 3 games. He's going to need to do that, and Jonathan Taylor is going to need to run the ball like he has been, especially that 150 yards against the Raiders was really, really impressive. And Naheem Hines is another running back who's been playing well for them. And I don't know where Marlon Mack fits into this team next year. He may need to move on, or maybe they bring him back and they find another role for him. And maybe they run 3 running backs like the Ravens have really been doing lately. But it's going to be interesting to see. And the Colts, I feel like, are along with the Titans and the Titans and the Colts, I feel like is really where we start to get in our series contenders. I feel like there's a lot more in the AFC than there are in the NFC, just of how they're built. But um, I mean, 9 through 7, the Bucks, Seahawks, and Rams are sleeper teams that could do it because of their quarterbacks and because of what their teams have been. But the Titans and Colts, I feel like we're really in the cream of the crop.
Yeah, and I think we can move on to another contender on the NFC, the Saints, who they played really good defense against Patrick Mahomes. It was just their offense couldn't really get going. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I feel like it's more of the rust that was on Drew Brees. He had just come back from 3 weeks or 4 weeks from injury, and he really needs to prove it this week that was just rust, and he can get it through a full game, throwing the ball to his normal targets. I also feel like having Michael Thomas out for another couple weeks hurts, but he should be back for the first round of the playoffs. So if they do have to play in the first round, he'll be back. But yeah, this is another team that I see as a series contender. We obviously view them here as the second best team in the NFC, and I only see two real series contenders in the NFC, and there are, like we said, some sleepers in the Bucks, Seahawks, and Rams, but these two are sick above the rest.
Yeah, and I think we can move on to number three. Best team in the NFC as of right now are the Packers. Um, Aaron Rodgers is doing great. I think he's the MVP candidate right now. No offense to Mahomes. Mahomes has, I think, one more interception. But I think the problem with the Packers I see is, can they stop the run on defense? And then is there a second definitive guy? And this ties into why Aaron Rodgers was upset with that Jordan Love pick. Not only was it a guy there he thinks could replace him, or he thinks will eventually replace him. He's definitely not replacing him now. But they could have used that on a wide receiver. There are plenty of wide receivers still up. And I think if they had a second option opposite of Devontae Adams, I would say Super Bowl. Um, Definitely in the Super Bowl. But because of that, and even within the season, they were tied to Will Fuller. I think Will Fuller would have been a good complement to Devontae Adams for the playoffs. What do you think?
Yeah, I disagree with them not having a second option because Robert Tonyan, who should have been the Pro Bowl pick over Evan Ingram, who only has one touchdown and about the same receptions, even though he has like 30 or 40 more targets than Robert Tonyan. Robert Tonyan only has 6 or 7 of his targets not result in catches, and he has 10 touchdown passes or receptions, I mean. And I feel like he is that second target, but I understand what you mean. They need another wide receiver target, not the tight end like Robert Tonyan. Alan Lazard needs to step into his role. MVS needs to step into his role. But I feel like they're definitely the best team in the NFC. And like you said, I agree. Their biggest problem is that rush defense. They have Jair Alexander. They have Kevin King. They have Adrian Amos for all their passing, for all the passing defense. But their rushing defense needs to prove that it is what it is. Or at least good enough to beat these teams like KC, who does have a pretty good running game, even though they lost Clyde, and the Bills, who have lost their running game, the running touch lately, except for that 51-yard rush by Devin Singletary at the end of the Broncos game. But I feel like we can move on to number 2, which is a pretty surprising pick, depending on who you talk to.
Yeah, number two, we have the Kansas City Chiefs. They're just not playing their best football right now, but they're still playing well. Um, speaking of, in contrast to the Packers, they have plenty of weapons. They have Tyreek Hill, you have Kelsey. They did lose Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but their backup is Le'Veon Bell, who he's playing better than I expected with them. He's making a lot of key plays, and then Patrick Mahomes is just being Patrick Mahomes. I think there's definitely an argument for the MVP, but I would just put Rodgers over him. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Mahomes has 4 less touchdown passes and 1 more pick, and his passer rating isn't as good. But I mean, it's really close. I understand the argument for each. I feel like I would be baffled if it wasn't Mahomes or Rodgers. It definitely should be one of those two. And right now, I do give the edge to Rodgers. But I mean, there's still 2 games to go in the season. Uh, the real difference between the Chiefs and obviously the next team that's above them, I feel like, is how they're playing against the worst teams. If we look at how the Chiefs played against the Broncos, the Chiefs only won by a couple points, 6 points, I think 22-16 or something like that. And the Bills, who's our number one, obviously, because we only have one team left, destroyed the Broncos on Saturday Night Football. I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, the Bills are just playing really well right now, and like you said, they're beating the teams really well. The Chiefs just give too much time. Like the Saints almost made a comeback against them, and the Chiefs also, the punt returner Robinson fumbled the ball. It should have been a touchdown, but that Saints player just missed it, and it turned out to be a safety. So I definitely think that's what puts the Bills over. And Josh Allen's playing really well, and it's incredible to see how him and Stephon Diggs are playing together.
Yeah, I mean that connection, they're really trying to prove everybody wrong. And I feel like even though the Chiefs, I would give the edge on who I feel would win the Super Bowl this season, I do feel like the Bills are the better team this week. And even though the Chiefs beat the Bills earlier, I don't know how that would turn out if they played this week or next week. It's going to be interesting to see. The Chiefs, as long as they win this week, will lock up the 1 seed. I believe they already did lock up the 1 seed because of the loss, because of the Steelers' loss. But it'll be interesting to see how this all turns out, and um, we hope everybody stays safe during the holiday season.
Yes, happy holidays, and we hope you enjoyed listening. We appreciate you listening and to our 23rd episode. Please check out our last episode where Austin and I gave our own predictions of playoff teams for the NBA. Again, if this is your first time listening to our show, make sure to go check out our new trailer to learn what our podcast is all about. Also, for everyone to make sure you hit that like and subscribe button and click on the bell to turn on notifications to find out when we drop our next episode. In our next episode, we will be um, talking about, I think, the NBA and our championship or bust. Also, make sure to be on the lookout for a special episode in upcoming days as we don't want to spoil the surprise.